This is the story of Mafia. The last door he knocked was his own coffin. Our story begins in 1908 in New York City. A young man named Charles Lucky Luciano was having a great night. He just successfully pulled off a major heist at Belmont Park Racetrack, stealing $37,000 from a bookie. He and his friends were celebrating in style. However, their joy was short-lived. As they were driving home, police ambushed the car and arrested Luciano. He ended up serving only 14 months of his 5 to 10-year sentence due to overcrowding in New York's prisons. But this would be the first of many times that Lucky would find himself on the wrong side of the law. After his release, he returned to his old life of crime and formed an alliance with another mobster named Frank Castellano. Together, they began operating a casino and a lottery in Harlem. They also teamed up with another criminal, Waxy Gordon, to take over the territory of a rival gang led by Dutch Schultz. As tensions rose between the two gangs, Dutch Schultz decided to eliminate his enemies. On June 22, 1935, he and his men kidnapped Waxy Gordon and drove him out into the countryside. There, they proceeded to torture him for information about his partners. Unfortunately for Gordon, they never got the information they were looking for because he died during the torture session. His body was then buried in a shallow grave. News of Waxy Gordon's death reached Lucky Luciano, who immediately went to see the underboss of the rival gang, Joe Mafia. Luciano demanded justice for his friend and warned Mafia that if he didn't do something about it, he would declare war on the entire gang. Mafia, however, refused to listen to Luciano's demands. On October 15, 1935, Lucky Luciano and Frank Castellano, along with several other gangsters, met in secret to plan their retaliation against Mafia's gang. They decided to kidnap and murder the underboss. A few days later, on October 19, 1935, the hit squad set their plan into action. They kidnapped Joe Mafia and drove him out to a secluded area. There they bound and gagged him before shooting him to death. They then buried his body in a shallow grave. Word quickly spread throughout the city of what had happened to Mafia, and soon enough, the other members of his gang were demanding revenge. This sparked a gang war that would come to be known as the Castellamares War. The conflict was primarily fought between Mafia's gang and Luciano's gang, but other gangs also became involved. The fighting was brutal and deadly, with dozens of gang members being killed on both sides. Luciano's gang was eventually victorious, and he became the most powerful mobster in the city. However, his reign of power didn't last long. In 1936, he was arrested on charges of running a prostitution ring and was sentenced to 52 100 years in prison. While incarcerated, he continued to run his criminal empire from behind bars and even formed the Commission, a group of 6 mobsters who would oversee the day-to-day operations of the various crime families. After serving 18 years of his sentence, Luciano was paroled in 1952, but his freedom was short-lived. In 1963, he was arrested again, this time on charges of drug trafficking, and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. This time he refused to cooperate with the authorities and remained silent until his release in 1976. At the age of 67, he spent his remaining days running a legitimate business and avoiding the police. However, his luck would eventually run out. In 1981, he was arrested one final time on charges of racketeering and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Now, this could have been the end of the story, but there's a twist. You see, after Luciano's arrest, his health began to deteriorate rapidly. He suffered from a heart condition and had recently had an appendix operation. With his health failing, Luciano's lawyers went to the judge and requested that he be released on bail pending the outcome of his appeal. The judge agreed, and Luciano was released from prison on $1 million bail. However, this was not to last. On July 26, 1981, while staying at his daughter's house in Manhattan, Luciano suffered a fatal heart attack. He was only 69 years old. News of his death spread quickly through the city, and there was an outpouring of grief from his family and friends. However, the police were not so sympathetic. They had been tracking Luciano for years, and were finally able to lay him to rest, or rather in prison where he belonged. They arrested 7 of his associates on charges of racketeering and conspiracy, and began to build a case against them. The trial lasted for months, and the jury was unable to reach a verdict. Eventually the charges were dropped and the men were released. But the damage was done. The police had broken up Luciano's criminal empire and the city was safer as a result. So there you have it. The story of how Lucky Luciano was brought down and the impact it had on organized crime in the United States. Do you think that Luciano was a good or bad person? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching.